Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine.
Hi everyone, I'm Bryce Duskett and thank you for joining us today on Market Journal. Behind me, a Kloss and a John Deere combine are rolling in southeast Nebraska. Earlier this growing season though, it was a big white combine, also known as hail, that pummeled this field of soybeans. As we start today's show, we are checking in on harvest progress near Waverly. In terms of the yield, producer Andrew Neyer says it's a bit difficult to compare year over year, as last year was a record one.
Yeah, beans, record crop for both corn and beans last year. We're probably half on beans compared to last year. Normal is a little bit less than half. For corn, we're down probably 20 to 40% depending on the field. Beans are probably more disappointing just because of the rain and everything. Caught the heat at the wrong time. But of course you're thankful for crop insurance, so.
We appreciate the perspective from Andrew as well as the use of the field today for today's broadcast. Coming up on the show, we'll discuss the grain markets and of course get a look at weather with Al Dutcher. We'll do that here in a moment, but first, Nebraska producers are facing 2 consecutive dry years. This is raising questions about nitrogen application for the 2023 crop. It is recommended that operations in irrigated or dryland areas with normal production should carry on as normal. However, for those dryland areas that have been dealing with significant yield reduction, there might be reason to adjust your nitrogen application for the next growing season. For more on this topic, we turn to Market Journal's Mike Straub.
As yield numbers come in this harvest season, if you happen to notice a significant reduction in your crop due to the continuing drought conditions we faced the last couple of years, odds are that crop nitrogen uptake was reduced as well. Conditions like this are conducive to leaving a considerable amount of unused nitrogen in the soil.
When there are dry conditions, there is a limited movement of nitrogen into the soil, which reduces crop nitrogen uptake, and then it affects crop grain yield. If you were in the area of the state where you had a severe drought and there was a drastic yield reduction, that means that not all of the nitrogen that was applied to the crop was taken up by the crop. So some of that nitrogen is left into the soil. So that's why we encourage the producers and crop consultant to estimate the residual nitrogen into the soil, take soil sample and estimate how much nitrogen is has not been used by the soil and how much nitrogen is left into the soil. So definitely this nitrogen can be used for the next season, so you may want to credit this nitrogen into nitrogen rate recommendation for the next crop. This can not only decrease the fertilizer cost, increase your profitability, but it can also protect the environment.
The best way to determine the amount of any residual nitrogen left in the ground will be via soil sampling. When it comes to testing your soil, timing of that will be determined by your timetable as it pertains to nitrogen application for any given field.
So the soil sampling can be done either in fall or spring. It really depends when you want to apply fertilizer. For example, if you are looking to apply fertilizer in fall, you want to take soil sample right after harvest or before fertilizer application. Otherwise, if you are looking to apply fertilizer during spring or in season, that's what we recommend, because that is the time when it is close when the crop can take up the nitrogen. So in that case, you want to take soil sample during the spring period. And then you don't want to take the soil sample during fall and apply that to spring, because in that way you may end up applying less nitrogen, because some of the nitrogen could be lost through snow melt or precipitation during the early spring. So therefore it is really a best practice to sample soil in spring for spring or in season nitrogen fertilizer decisions.
Finally, When sampling, it is imperative to collect a good representative sample of the soil. When testing fields with soil and yield variability, you may want to consider gathering those samples by zones within the field to get a more complete picture of the patterns of residual nitrate.
So collecting a good and representative soil sample is really key for making good fertility management decisions. So we recommend that you can take soil sample from the top 2 foot depth at least, but it is preferable if you can take to 3rd or 4th foot, because in that way you can track where the nitrogen is in the soil profile. So in order to do that, it is also recommended that you split those 1 foot into those samples into 1 foot increment. You can track where the nitrogen is sitting there. And soil sampling for your field is important in such a way that there could be a lot of variation of soil nitrogen across your field. But if your field is uniform, you may consider taking up 4 to 6 cores for not more than 40 acres. But if the dry conditions has resulted in uneven yield with different soil types and landscape position in your field, so you may want to divide your field into different management zones and take soil sample within each of those management zones. There are some certain data layers, just like yield monitor data, digital soil maps, and elevation data that can help you to identify those management zones.
Having endured 2 consecutive dry seasons in 2021 and 2022, there is a good chance there is a considerable amount of unused nitrogen still locked in your soil, which can be utilized by next year's crops, saving you the added expenses of buying and applying more nitrogen down the road. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Mike Straub.
Thank you for that information, Mike. If you'd like to learn more about this topic, we've added an informative link along with this story. You can find them both on the Market Journal website. As input costs continue to rise, some ag producers are trying several options to offset those expenses. Electricity is one of those costs that can be a challenge to lower. That is one reason why solar power is becoming a bit more appealing for energy alternatives for some producers. Market Journal's Bill Dodd caught up with Extension educator John Hay to discuss the current state of solar power in ag operations.
There may be several different reasons you may be thinking of utilizing solar power on your agricultural operation. You may be interested in the potential economic benefits, or perhaps you'd just like to be more eco-friendly. In any case, solar power on your operation can have its rewards and challenges. Before you make any investment, it will be imperative to do your homework first. As Extension educator John Hay puts it, success isn't choosing to install solar. Success is doing a good analysis of the resources to make the best decisions.
Well, we're talking about solar on the farm and what is the feasibility and what is some of the economics, and we're really trying to get them to do some homework ahead of getting a system or ahead of signing any contracts, because we want them to avoid some of the major issues. So they really need to be contacting their utility early to make sure that how does the rate schedule work? How does it work with that particular utility? Things like that. But there is some utilities that, as the utilities reach a certain amount of installed systems, they can change their policies, and those changes in policies locally are a pretty big deal. Also, really doing their homework with installers to try to understand what's a good installer and how to find one that's going to do a good job for them if they decide they want solar.
There are an ever-increasing number of solar options for today's agricultural producers, from solar-powered irrigation systems to outright solar farming contracts. Each operation will have different goals in mind when implementing solar technologies on their land and everyday workflow. So it's important to understand that farms that have more consistent use of solar have the best chance to gain value.
Well, solar works really good works a little better for loads that are more consistent through the year, right? So it's something we use all the time. Solar isn't always the best application when we put it on an intermittent load like irrigation, and that's because of how the value of that electricity is when I put it on, when I use it, because I'm either using it or it's going onto the grid, and there's different values for that electricity, and so I'd rather use it myself. That's where the higher value is. And so that if I have an irrigation system, I'm only using it during 3 months a year, and I'm putting it on the grid, maybe getting lesser value the rest of the year. So the economics aren't always as good. So it's important to kind of think about what is the load. But so you have a load that's maybe a little more consistent. The cost of a system is going to range from maybe $2.50 to a little over $3 per watt installed. But again, that's where I scale it. How big is that system? A small system is not going to cost as much as a larger one. But there's kind of a range in price. But by doing it by per watt, I can kind of think, is it a 10 kW system or a 25 or something like that?
Another thing to consider is your operation's access to your local power grid. While running an off-grid system may result in some energy savings and a slight reduction in the overall carbon footprint of your operation, the cost to build and maintain that system could be quite high.
Having, in most cases, off-grid systems are really expensive, and really you have to think twice about whether that's going to work out, or there's maybe some better options. So grid-connected systems are the most economical, and so grid access is really important. And we have some laws in Nebraska, and there are some federal laws that allow grid access, but we have to also be very careful with how the utility interprets those rules, and we understand what is the value of that electricity based on the utility's rate schedule. So that utility can really dictate whether this is a good deal or isn't.
When making the decision to invest in solar for economic benefit, it's important to note returns on investment are highly variable from location to location. While John is an advocate of solar power, he's much more passionate about making sure our producers are doing their due diligence in finding out all the pros and cons of installing solar on their particular operation so they can get the most out of the systems they invest in.
Well, really, it's not that I'm trying to tell people that they should or shouldn't invest in solar. It's that people are interested in solar, right? So we want a lot of people in Nebraska are interested in solar for different reasons, individual personal reasons, and then we try to say, let's see if we can understand the economics and understand the pros and cons of this system so they can make good decisions. And so payback is ranging maybe from 8 to 14 years, and this is depending on if a farm system that can acquire like the USDA REAP grant might be a little closer to 8, while if a home that can't access that REAP grant may be closer to 14. So there's a lot of variability in payback, and there are some areas where the paybacks are much worse than that, and there may be a couple that they're a little better. So it's pretty variable out there with respect to payback.
For about the last decade now, solar power has seen an increase in output, while components of solar systems have become more affordable. As the industry continues to grow, you may want to consider helping your operation grow with solar, but you'll want to make sure you do your homework first. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Bill Dodd.
Thank you for that story, Bill. Another aspect of solar power is solar farm contracts. Don tells us if you're considering solar land leases, you should first seek advice from an attorney and take time to consider the contract and its implications for your land. If you'd like more information on solar power and other means of bioenergy, you can visit bioenergy.unl.edu. Shifting our focus over to the grain markets now, this week we had the opportunity to catch up with Todd Hultman from DTN. Harvest progress continues across the United States at a good pace. There are some challenges, though, particularly when it comes to shipping grain that is concerning traders. We got into that with Todd, but began by getting his general take on the grain complex. Well, let's get into the grain complex here. What's your general take on the corn, soybean, and wheat markets?
Oh, we have a lot of factors hitting us from all different directions these days. And most notably, we have a bearish outside influence from concerns about higher interest rates. Is the U.S. economy headed to a recession? Is the world economy headed to a recession? But overall, within the grain fundamentals, we have a very tight fundamental supply situation for all three big crops, corn, soybeans, and wheat. And that, I think, is really holding prices together quite well, in spite of a lot of outside concerns.
You mentioned the word recession there. We are hearing that a lot lately, but frankly, we've been hearing that for several months now. Is that a big concern on your big list of the things impacting the commodities right now?
Well, frankly, it hasn't been, Bryce, because it does affect traders. It affects traders, the things they worry about. And in that aspect, it does have an effect on our grain prices. But overall, food demand is fairly immune to talk of recession, especially in the case of wheat. Wheat has almost no demand correlation to the economy's ups and downs. So, whether we have a good year or a bad year economically, people still have to eat, and that tends to keep the demand situation moving.
Todd, it's hard not to get on social media, on Facebook or Twitter right now, and not see some of the pictures of the Mississippi River and how dry it is in some areas. I've got a viewer question I'll get to here in a moment about the Nebraska impact, but big picture, what can you share with our viewers about that situation?
Well, obviously, it's very tough, and I don't think the situation is being exaggerated at all. In fact, we have a dry Platte River in Nebraska, and we have dry rivers all around the world. Europe had dry rivers this year. The Yangtze River in China is dry, and so yes, we're seeing it hit home here on the Mississippi. And the unfortunate thing is, it's hitting us at harvest time when we really depend on those barge traffic to move that corn and soybeans downriver to the Gulf. This particular time of year is especially the active season for soybeans. We need to get those soybeans moving to the Gulf, so most likely we can get them headed toward China before Brazil's big crop shows up in February of 2023. So it is a concern.
I saw shipments on soybeans down nearly 25%, corn also down. If I remember those statistics right. Had a viewer question, Todd, that I mentioned here. They were asking about the Nebraska impact. Of course, you don't think of the Mississippi there, but I know it has an impact on traders' minds, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Just the fact that it's tough overall for the nation to fulfill the export sales or export possibilities, I should say, that we have. And for right now, especially in the case of soybeans, that tends to have a depressive effect on all the cash prices around the country. Now, here in Nebraska, we're actually doing fairly well. The cash soybean prices stand in the low 13s. On corn, we see upper 6s to low 7s, which is even a little better than the national average. Some of the areas to the north of us, the Dakotas, they're going to ship grain to the PNW, and they're actually going to benefit from a dry Mississippi River. But I would still say in general that it tends to scare traders a bit away from the market when they hear this type of news.
Todd, you shared some of those local prices. Basis still strong, it seems like, across the countryside. I think that has some of our producers, we've talked about this with several analysts over the past few weeks, talking about what to do. Do you hold on to your grain? Do you go ahead and move it across to an end user right away? I saw you wrote, Todd, you're suggesting hanging on to a bulk of that. Do I understand correct?
Yeah, so in the case of corn, we've already recommended making 50% sales of your 2022 production. I mean, it's just hard not to take advantage of these good prices, even if they are at harvest time. In the case of soybeans, we have not moved any 2022 production yet. And I really think we're going to see better opportunities come our way in the January to May period for soybeans. And we just have a very strong demand situation. As you mentioned, the basis is uncommonly strong for this time of year in both corn and soybeans. But in soybeans in particular, we just have such a strong demand situation sitting up. The crush incentive right now, Bryce, for soybeans is among the best that the soybean processors have ever seen. So if we can get beyond these little export hurdles that we have this fall and get past some of this harvest pressure, when the grain gets stored away and end users have to come knocking on your door, that's when you tend to get the better price.
Todd, I'll give you the final word here. What else would you like to leave our viewers with today?
Oh, gosh. Well, I know you're hearing about a lot of negative headlines, not only for the U.S., but around the world. But I just want to encourage you that the demand for food and feed in the world is as needed as it ever has been. The war in Ukraine is still a very ugly scenario, still has a lot of risk and uncertainty to it. And the UN is talking about concerns about increased hunger and food insecurity situations around the world this year. So that grain production is needed as much as ever. I think the outlook is still positive in terms of expecting higher prices as we get into the winter months. And don't let the negative headlines get you too down.
Coming up next week, we'll be joined by a new face for the Market Journal broadcast. That is Kyle Bumstead of Allendale. He'll join us to break down both the cattle and the grain markets. Moving on, as soybean harvest begins to wrap up, some farmers are looking at strategies for next year's crop. This past summer, soybean management field days were hosted by Nebraska Extension at 4 sites, including a dryland farm site for the very first time. This dryland soybean site allowed researchers to look at varied management approaches that can fit into a dryland soybean production method. You can learn more about some of those topics that were covered in the October issue of the Nebraska Farmer. Well, it is now time for weather with Nebraska Extension ag climatologist and Market Journal chief meteorologist Al Dutcher. Al, it's been a roller coaster week with lows in the low teens, or middle teens I should say, but highs back in the 80s. How are things shaping up for the next week?
Well, Bryce, yes, we did have a big roller coaster swing in temperatures, seen lows that got down into the lower 20s to the upper teens across the state. And this cold air mass pushed all the way to their south out into the Texas-Oklahoma range and all the way eastward into the lower Ohio River Valley. Now, we didn't see any precipitation as expected, but the temperatures were definitely cooler than normal during the first part of the week. We've seen this big warm up, and we continue to see the warm up this weekend. And now we have an impending storm system. Before we get to that, let's take a look at what the latest forecast is from CPC in regards to November conditions. And if we look at the model right now, they're indicating above normal conditions in terms of temperatures of the southwest extending up into the central plains, including Nebraska. Highest risk the southwestern 2/3 of the state. Now, as we go into the precipitation, below normal to our south, just a slight risk for below normal across the southeastern 1/3 of the state and above normal across the northern Rockies. So now as we go to the upper air model, the first thing we'll draw your attention to is that storm system out west. That trough been fairly well advertised the last few days. Expected to swing through as we get into the later part of the weekend, but in advance of that, we're going to see southerly flow at the surface to southwesterly, very windy conditions, and temperatures statewide that should reach into the 80s and possibly will push as we get into the late afternoon, potentially the upper 80s across the southwest. As we go into tomorrow, this trough starts to make its way down toward the southern Great Basin, and then it will eject eastward. So we will start to see a cold front pushing through the state during the afternoon, evening hours. That may generate some thunderstorm activity across the southeastern part of the state, but it looks right now that most of the western part of the state will be caught in a dry slot with no precipitation. So we get into the day Monday morning, here's this trough going to start to lift rapidly toward the northeast, driving that cold front through. So this is our best chance for good moisture across western Nebraska, and it's probably just going to be a moderate rainfall event. Most of the precipitation will swing down through Texas with this upper air low as it cuts off and then swings toward the northeast. And we see is that as we get into Tuesday, start seeing the system cut off and then it will drift. That's going to cut off the moisture flow to our north temporarily. So we'll see the cooler conditions move in, back into those 50s and 60s across the state until the system itself moves over toward the Great Lakes. And so as we go into the day on Wednesday, the system starts to move into the mid-Mississippi River Valley. We see another trough digging down to the western United States. This has been a little bit stronger than was previously recorded. So we'll wait to see whether or not this verifies out, because this could potentially bring in some moisture as we go into next weekend. But we should start to see a rebound in temperatures as this low passes toward our east-southeast. As we go into Thursday, now we start to see this low moving up into the Ohio River Valley. Get this trough basically cutting into the Great Basin just like this last one. We're going to see a big swing in temperatures. Very warm conditions will start to develop late next week. Wouldn't be surprised we'll be right back up into the 70s. And as we get into the day on Friday, it takes us upper air low into the Dakotas. As this comes a little farther south, though, this could be a potential precipitation maker. Now, as we look at the 8 to 14 day forecast, it's taken into consideration the slowness of that trough moving in, so we still see above normal temperatures. And in terms of precipitation, slight tendency for drier than normal conditions, but a lot of moisture coming into the western United States. So hopefully this is a trend where we start to see these lows come out on a regular basis, and when we see some improvement in drought conditions across the state.
All right, thank you very much, Al. Finally today, we wanted to make some time here to update you on a couple of extension events that are coming up in the very near future. First, on November 1st, Nebraska Extension will hold its cover crop grazing conference at the Eastern Nebraska Research and Extension Center that is located near Ithaca. This new expo will help first-time or experienced farmers looking to fine-tune their cover crop grazing management by utilizing cover crops as an alternative forage source. Speakers and panelists will address important issues for Nebraska's farmers and ranchers. Furthermore, this event will provide one-on-one discussions with local and private industry exhibitors and sponsors. The conference will kick off with registration, refreshments, and a trade show. Educational programs will run from 10 a.m. to 2:45 in the afternoon. And as mentioned, we'll include a producer panel session, small group discussions, as well as a live field demonstration. Guests are requested to pre-register by October 28th. There is a small $10 fee to attend, and lunch will be provided for attendees. If you'd like more information, you can reach out to the contact listed on the screen now. Moving on, and on Wednesday, November 9th, Nebraska Extension will be hosting its Weed Science School at the Eastern Nebraska Research and Extension Center as well. Nebraska educators and industry specialists will come together to conduct this one-day event that will offer producers a plethora of information regarding both chemical and non-chemical approaches toward weed management, and will also count towards CCA credits.
See, Nebraska Extension Weed Science School is extremely important for growers to attend because we are going to cover a number of topics on weed management by using some non-chemical methods such as cover crops, and if you are interested in cover crops, what herbicide options you can use in corn and soybean production systems for best management of herbicide-resistant weeds. And we also have a presentation about off-target injury of dicamba in soybean and also in specialty crops. So there are several topics to be covered, and there is really interesting information to update your knowledge about management of herbicide-resistant weeds in agronomic crops in Nebraska.
Again, that event will take place on Wednesday, November 9th, with registration starting at 8:30, and the event will begin at 8:45, running until 2:30 in the afternoon. Lunch will be included, and there is no fee to attend. However, guests are highly encouraged to pre-register for the event and can do so up until the day before that event, which again is November 8th. As we mentioned earlier, CCA credits will be available to participants of this event. If you'd like more information, you're welcome to reach out to either Amit Jalla or Jenny Reese. You can contact them by phone or email. Their information is at the bottom of your screen. We've also taken the liberty of posting all of this information along with a story at the Market Journal website. If you'd like the latest on future events from Nebraska Extension, you can visit that website that's listed at your bottom of the screen now, and we'll be sure to post that information on the Market Journal website. Well, that is going to do it for this week's show. Remember, if you did miss a story, be sure to download the Market Journal mobile app or follow the team on social media to join in on the conversation. We hope to see you back here next time. Until then, I'm Bryce Duskett, wishing you a safe and productive week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.